You're watching VinylicPumaGaming. Warning, vulgarity awaits. Well guys, it's been a long time. Wait a minute. Why the am I being censored? What is this bullshit? What a boatload of But enough of that. What's up guys? Back with another Borderlands 2 countdown video, and today I figured we could go over some of the worst DLC guns and weapons in Borderlands 2. Now, before we start, this list will include weapons that I think are terrible, but if you think there are other equally terrible weapons that should have been included, feel free to leave a comment below letting me know what you think they are. But I guess without further ado, these will be the top 10 worst guns, weapons, and gear in Borderlands 2, so let's get this started. Number 10, the Crit SMG. So the Crit is pretty much Now, I'm not sure if the Crit was meant to be a joke weapon by the developers or not, but it does have some trollish aspects to it. Now, at first glance, the Crit appears to be an above-average mellow in SMG in terms of stats, and because the Crit is a Moxie weapon, you're getting the ability to heal for damage dealt. So, at first glance, you have a gun that's actually pretty amazing. However, sort of like how the drop key works on the PC version of Borderlands 2, the Crit will simply just slip out of your hands as you reload it. And as you can imagine, this unreliability makes using the Crit incredibly difficult. And it's a shame too, because the Crit potentially could have been a good weapon, as it has pretty good stats in all other areas. It just got f***ed up by this silly reload gimmick. But if you want this SMG, you're going to need to complete a side quest from the Dragon Keep DLC called Critical Fail, and prepare to die a lot. Number 9, the Tunguska rocket launcher. So the Tunguska is both a potentially awesome, however mostly terrible weapon. In concept, the idea of having a massive secondary explosion with a massive blast radius actually works pretty well. In fact, if you download a couple of mods for the Tunguska, you can actually make the Tunguska reasonably viable and a fairly decent alternative to the Norfleet. However, without these mods, the Tunguska is an irredeemable pile of f***. The major issue with using the Tunguska is that it could potentially hurt the player. In fact, it's guaranteed that if you fire this near your character, you will be taking damage. Now, it would be one thing if the Tunguska could potentially kill the player, but it dealt such an insane amount of damage that it was worth the risk. However, if you ask me, it doesn't really deal enough damage to justify its use. And besides, the Norfleet pretty much obliterates everything in a room, and there's almost no risk of getting hurt by it unless you're right next to the rocket when it explodes. But if you want the Tunguska, you can acquire it like you can most of the other Generation 1 pearlescents. Just try farming either the legendary loot midgets or, oh my god, what the hell, from the Digistruct Peak DLC. Number 8. The Seeker Assault Rifle. The Seeker is both a disappointment and a fairly bad weapon. As some of you know, the concept behind the Seeker is actually a pretty good one. After all, having a gun that homes in on enemies is actually a pretty cool idea and could potentially be a pretty fun gun to shoot. After all, it can be fun to simply line up your crosshairs and watch the Seeker's projectiles just hit on target. But let's talk about where the Seeker f***ed up. In my opinion, the biggest problem with this weapon is the result of the poor fire rate, which significantly lowers whatever DPS potential that the Seeker may have had to begin with. And this really makes a big difference on the higher difficulties, where the enemies have enough health regeneration to potentially heal from any damage you would have dealt with the Seeker. This gets compounded by the fact that the Seeker also has a relatively low projectile speed, so not only does it take forever to get your shots off in the first place, but it also takes forever for that said projectile to hit an enemy. There's also some other things like the inability to crit and the relatively high ammo consumption for the amount of damage the gun deals, but these wouldn't necessarily be deal breakers if the Seeker's DPS could be improved somehow. If you want this gun, you can purchase it from the Seraph vendor located in Flamerock Refuge in the Dragon Keep DLC. And if you're on PC, I'm sure you can find some mods out there that will improve the Seeker to actually make it good. Number 7, the Bearcat Assault Rifle. The Bearcat, like most other grenade assault rifles, tends to be lacking because of its high ammo consumption and its inability to perform critical hits. However, what really makes the Bearcat difficult to use is its ammo consumption when compared to its potentially low damage output. In later difficulties, it's totally possible to empty several full magazines just to defeat an enemy, and when you consider that the Bearcat is consuming 6 ammo per shot, and a burst can potentially consume 18 or more assault rifle ammo, you'll start to notice that the Bearcat is wasting your ammo. The Bearcat is a shame because I think it had the potential to be truly good, especially if the damage was a little higher and the gun simply consumed less ammo per shot. Otherwise, there's not much else to the Bearcat. It's a fairly shitty assault rifle that is acquired in the same way that most of the other Generation 1 pearlescents are. So you can either farm the legendary loot midgets, or oh my god what the hell from the Destruct Pete DLC in order to get this gun. Number 6. The Midnight Star Grenade. So, the Midnight Star is intended as a joke weapon by the developers. After all, the cursed text on this particular grenade mod reads, and I quote, "Curse of the Cackling Designer." So that's a pretty big giveaway. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what this grenade does, as soon as the initial explosion occurs and the MIRVs are deployed, the Midnight Star's MIRV grenades will fly towards the player, regardless of distance. For that reason, this particular grenade is almost unusable. After all, a grenade that's designed to hurt the player isn't going to really be that effective. And while I suppose you could acquire a Midnight Star to activate certain skills like Krieg's Release the Beast, I think there are far safer ways to do that. For example, you could use an Orphan Maker to whittle away your HP. I guess if you want this particular grenade, you can get it from the Message in a Bottle side quest for Magnus Lighthouse in the Captain Scarlet DLC. I guess it's an amusement, and maybe you should experience the Midnight Star at least once. Number 5. The Devastator Pistol. Ah, the Devastator. You'd think that it would actually be pretty good, given that it's inspired by an amazing rapid-fire rocket launcher from Duke Nukem 3D. Well, you'd be wrong. Now, the Devastator is terrible for a variety of reasons. The first reason is the Devastator's astonishingly poor accuracy, both while hip-firing and aiming down the sights. And this is compounded by the second reason, which is that the Devastator's actual projectiles fire from behind the gun, as opposed to out of its barrel. So, not only are you getting inaccurate shots with the Devastator, but those projectiles tend to be traveling through the air longer, further decreasing the likelihood of actually hitting the intended target. What makes matters even worse is that you can only acquire this weapon in Ultimate Vault-Hunter mode by defeating either of the raid bosses for the Captain Scarlet DLC. So this means you'll either need to beat Master Guy, which is a pain in the ass, or by defeating Hyperius, which is also kind of a pain in the ass. And to be honest, I'm not sure why this couldn't have been a weapon that could be acquired from the Seraph vendor. Then again, I suppose it might be worse if you grinded for 120 Seraph Crystals or so, only to buy a weapon that's a piece of shit. I highly recommend you avoid this weapon if you're on console, or if you're on PC, try to look for a mod that fixes the projectiles and the god-awful accuracy. Number 4. The Wanderlust Pistol. In my opinion, when it comes to the Generation 2 pearlescent weapons, of which there are 4, I would say that the Wanderlust is by far the worst. After all, the Becca is pretty awesome, the Godfinger is potentially amazing, and the Carnage is decent, but admittedly it's not as good as the other 2 weapons that I just mentioned. As for the Wanderlust, it is a pistol that has extremely low accuracy. However, the projectiles can home in on enemies, sort of similar to the Seeker. Now, the idea behind this weapon would be that you could simply fire it from cover, and the projectiles would eventually seek out and damage an enemy. And while this sounds really cool in concept, it's totally possible for the player to fire an entire Wanderlust magazine and have the projectiles home in on entirely different enemies. And this is bad in Ultimate Vault-Hunter mode, because you want to be able to deal as much direct damage to an enemy's health bar to counteract that health regeneration. Ideally, having 30 shots in a magazine hitting is better than only having 10 to 20 of them hit. And I also feel that the Wanderlust would truly need to have 10 or more projectiles per shot to be truly effective. Having just one projectile homing in on an enemy greatly limits the Wanderlust's DPS potential and makes it less fun to use. But still, if you want this gun, you can acquire it by farming tubbies after level 61 in Ultimate Vault Hunter mode. And you will also need the Digistruct Peak DLC. Number 3. The Storm Sniper Rifle. The Storm is an epic fail of a sniper rifle in my opinion. Why? Well, the problem with the Storm isn't necessarily the orbs that emit after the initial projectile hits a surface or an enemy, though we'll get to that. The problem with the Storm is its poor base damage. Typically, you want as high of a base damage on your sniper rifle as possible, or in the case of something like a Droog or the Lyuda, you want respectable base damage and relatively high fire rate. And the Storm, on the other hand, opts for lower base damage with the intention to deal the majority of its damage through shock damage over time effects. While this could potentially be a cool idea if it worked, the problem is that the shock damage over time that's being applied isn't particularly impressive. As for the tessellating orbs that deploy when the Storm's projectile hits a surface, the damage dealt by these is terrible as well. In fact, you could probably go through all of your sniper ammo before you defeated just one regular mob enemy. But I guess if you want this particular weapon, you can acquire it from either Legendary Loot Midgets or from, oh my god what the hell, from Digistruct Peak. Though I think I have to say that I don't think any mods would be able to fix this one. Number 2. The Retcher Shotgun. The only positive thing the Retcher has going for it is the fact that it only consumes 1 ammo per shot, where most other E-Tech shotguns usually consume 2 or more. However, I would say the Retcher is pretty much worse than a standard E-Tech shotgun in every other way. For whatever reason, the Retcher has a smaller arc than your standard splat gun, meaning you can actually manage to have less range with the Retcher than you could your non-unique E-Tech splat gun. And like all of the other Seraph Rarity weapons from the Captain Scarlet DLC, you're going to have decreased accuracy, meaning that it's going to be even more difficult to actually shoot and successfully hit enemies. Even worse, the Retcher only drops from Hyperius in Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, meaning that you will have to have fairly decent gear to acquire a Retcher in the first place. Honestly, if you're looking for a good Seraph shotgun, just go with the Omen and sell this piece of shit. And finally, number 1, the Boom Puppy Assault Rifle. What a boatload of grass! Anyway, the Boom Puppy is an assault rifle that was added with Torg's Campaign of Carnage DLC, and while it's true that grenade assault rifles in general are extremely lacking as they tend to consume a lot of ammo per shot and can't perform critical hits, I would argue that the Boom Puppy is another level of awful. Why? Well, the Boom Puppy combines everything that's undesirable about grenade assault rifles with a bizarre projectile pattern that's reminiscent of a rubberized grenade mod or the legendary Rolling Thunder grenade. Now, if you've used either of these grenades, you will know that having projectiles act in this manner means that accuracy pretty much goes out the window. And perhaps to make things even worse, the Boom Puppy's projectiles have the potential to hurt the player. So in more enclosed spaces, you could potentially fire this gun and end up killing yourself with it. I also take issue with the Walking the Dog side quest mission that's required in order to get a Boom Puppy. It involves getting a fire skag named Enrique to follow you around the map. However, you have to attack him to get him to follow you, and Enrique is constantly being attacked by the other NPCs. So as you can imagine, it's an escort quest from hell. But if you take anything away from this particular video, it should be the Boom Puppy. But alright guys, I think that's gonna wrap up this particular video. If you liked this video, feel free to leave a like, click the bell to join the notification squad, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.